And welcome to the AV Forums podcast. Sore feet, sore heads, aching joints, and back to grey skies. It has to be the CES podcast special, recorded the day after we've just landed, so jet lagged to hell myself, and joining me is Assistant Editor Steve Withers.
Hi everybody.
And News Editor Mark Hodgkinson.
Hello.
Poor old Mark was stuck in the UK, but still probably saw more of CES than we did, being on the show floor. Certainly the press conferences, Mark. You covered them. Again, it's one of these things that seems to be really old-fashioned and dated when you can get live streams to the UK in real time, and you can put your news up probably quicker than if myself and Steve had been sitting in the press conference.
Yeah, and moreover, if you can, you can get the press kits a bit early, so you can have all the news before they've delivered it. So yeah, it's much easier. It's streaming in HD, sat in the comfort of my own living room. You could pause, rewind, you could go back and look at things. So yeah, it was a much better way than actually going there, I'm sure, certainly for the initial day. But it was the usual set of conferences. It just seems, I don't know, it seems to be the same thing that starts off every year, and it's this smart home idea, which is fine because it's coming, but it's not really target for our audience so much. But yeah, it was quite a decent set of conferences. I thought Samsung was a bit strange, but all in all, it was quite entertaining.
Did they wheel out any celebs for them?
No.
So after last year's meltdown by Michael,
yeah, I think that's really put them off. Yeah, no celebs that I remember. But I was suffering with the flu at the time, so my enthusiasm levels weren't as high as they as they might have been. But yeah, I sat through to the bitter end, right till the Sony conference.
We haven't been to a press conference for the last couple of years, have we, Phil?
No, and like I say, I mean, it's a waste of time. You don't get hands-on with the product for a start. So,
well, first of all, you've got to queue for ages to get in, if you get in at all.
If you get in, because there's been some Samsung ones where we didn't get in.
Sat there, if you're not necessarily sat right at the very front, you're looking at a screen anyway, so you might as well just be watching the live feed. It's an absolute waste of time.
Yeah, it's a throwback to the old days, and I'm sure it will become an internet feed only thing. Probably in the future. I mean, if people have sense, any press organisations have sense, they'll sit and watch the stream. And
I think they like the applause, though, don't they? And the crowd.
Yeah, you want some kind of interaction from the crowd, I suppose. But it's all of it's fake anyway. Or worse still, what if nobody applauds?
Yeah.
But just get a whole load of employees to sit in,
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what you should do.
Yeah. So the way that we do our coverage, and you've probably just witnessed it on AV Forums, is that, like I say, Mark covers the press conferences, and then myself, Steve, and this year Stuart are out there at the show, and we go and then get hands-on with the product and speak to the UK reps and get the UK side of the story, because it is a US show, and it has been a very US-centric show until a few years ago, but I'm getting the feeling, Steve, it's starting to go a bit US-centric again, especially with the likes of companies like Sharp and Toshiba.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the case of Sharp and Toshiba, the stuff on the show won't be available in the UK. Well, actually, Toshiba didn't even have any TVs on display.
No, they've even pulled out the US market now, so
yeah,
very strange to see.
And Sharp well, their European business has been sold to a third party. So as far as Sharp TVs, real Sharp TVs are concerned, that's only Japan and the US now, which is a real shame because they had some really interesting stuff on display. And they always do. Every year we go to the Sharp stand. There's some really cool looking stuff. They've been doing a lot of big screens. They've been concentrating really on big screens for the last few years. They've got their 8K prototype on display. They had 4K. Sorry?
8 crazy. Is that 8 gangsters, is it?
Yeah, 8K again. But they also had their Beyond 4K, which is basically an 8K, well, kind of sort of halfway house between 4K and 8K by doing essentially the same thing that JVC are doing with some of their projectors, and also Epson recently, which is a kind of diagonally shifting the image across to create a sort of pseudo, in the case of JVC and Epson, a pseudo 4K image, and this is a pseudo 8K image. But what they were doing was they were showing some text, some very, very fine text, and you could see it on a 4K panel, a Beyond 4K panel, and an actual 8K panel. It was 8K text, effectively. And whilst on the 4K panel, you couldn't really read the very finest text, you could read it quite clearly on the Beyond 4K, and obviously it was a little bit sharper on the 8K. But I've got to say, the technology looked really impressive in terms of the way it worked. But we won't see it, so never mind.
Yeah, and we're going to get content as well. I mean, we're struggling to get content for 4K now. I mean, 8K,
well, I mean, no, I'm saying
beyond
that the Beyond 4K, taking 4K, making it look like 8K actually worked quite well. So yes, it was 4K content. It worked. It definitely was quite impressive technology. But as I say, we won't see it in this country. So never mind. Yeah, well, I think Phil's got a point. Let's just concentrate on getting 4K delivered, shall we?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's a shame because the Sharp stand, I think I was telling Stuart this when we were there, it's always a stand that we enjoy going to in the US. It's always got good technology. The TVs usually look very good. They've usually got some really nice stuff, but we never get to see it in the UK, and we definitely won't get to see it now. So it really is a shame that Sharp have gone that way. But I think in terms of certainly Japanese manufacturers, Steve, they really have a tough battle ahead. To remain competitive and to stay in the market. And although saying that, usually I've just been looking at the numbers this morning for our coverage, and I can only take in what our members and readers are looking at. But surprisingly, Panasonic have done really well this year in terms of numbers, in terms of people showing an interest in that. It's usually Samsung and LG who are way out in front. So
I'll give you one reason for that, Phil. 2 words: Panasonic OLED. That's why everyone read that article.
Yes.
Not a 4K Blu-ray.
Oh, and 4K Blu-ray, which again, I mean,
you forgot about that, Steve.
No, I haven't forgotten about it. But an empty box is neither here nor there, is it? It's not like they were showing an actual player that worked with a real disc.
Yeah, but that was surprising. So it still shows that there is an interest in the Japanese manufacturers. It's just that they really have a battle on their hand in it. And I think a perfect example of that was just how few new TVs that Sony announced.
Yeah, I mean, again, as you said earlier, Phil, what TVs are on display are obviously the US models. So there's no guarantee that what we're seeing is going to be released in the UK. And for example, on the Sony stand, there was no curved display there, but there is going to be a curved display released in Europe. But you're right. I mean, I think you can either go 2 ways. You can either have a lot of models, and this is what they used to be like. Right? There used to be hundreds and hundreds of all the models coming out, like rows and rows of TVs. Or you can concentrate on showing off the technology in the televisions. And I think there's been a move towards that more recently because it has become a more international show, and therefore what you really want to get across is this is our technology, this is how good our TV is going to look, and not the specific models, because that's not that interesting, frankly. And so Sony's stand was very much about the tech and less about individual models. There were a few models on display, and they had some. I mean, they had their 93C, the X93C. No, X900C, sorry. And then, by the way, Sony, please come up with some new numbers for your TVs. It's so confusing when it's the same model number every year with just a different suffix. Anyway, the X900C, which was 4.5 millimeters thick, LED LCD panel, really looked nice. I mean, Sony are very good when it comes to design and the look of their TVs. And this was another stunner from them. They also had the 93 and X93 and X94, which have high-res audio on them, and they're kind of the wedge-shaped ones, although they've made the wedge slightly less thick and more tapered than it was last year. Again, very attractive TVs. It's good to see a manufacturer kind of really trying to work on the sound quality of the televisions, which is nice. Sony been pushing higher contrast ratio, higher dynamic range, and wider color gamuts for a couple of years now. So I think they were ahead of the game there. They were using quantum dot, although they're not using it anymore, but they were using it 2 or 3 years ago.
So what are they? Do you think that
they wouldn't tell me? They wouldn't
think
tell
it might
me.
be C-LED. They showed that a couple of years ago, didn't they? Or 3 years ago?
It's
not. No, it's not C-LED.
Not nothing to do with C-LED.
I asked them what they were using, and they said it's a secret. So
fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, Samsung didn't come out and say they were using quantum dot initially, did they? But they are.
Everyone else appears to be, as far as anyone who's talking about wider dynamic, wider color gamuts is using quantum dot. Sony, who've ditched it for something else, but they wouldn't say what. So there you go.
Yeah, well, it probably just is that, and they just don't want to say.
Well, no, because they were the ones that pioneered it. So if it was, you'd think they'd be going like, "Oh, we were there first." So it's kind of slightly strange that they should ditch something that everyone else is now using and then not talk about what they are using. Anyway, They also wouldn't tell me. They didn't know. In fact, the guy didn't know. But I said, "How wide can the color gamut go? Can it hit DCI?" Which is clearly important going forward because, as we'll talk about later at length, I'm sure that's the spec.
Well, I think everybody just needs to forget about 2020.
What they're going to say is it will be in the spec, won't it, Phil? As a sort of a broad canvas. No way in hell they're going to actually release stuff in 2020 because they don't need to. They just use the Cinema Masters.
Well, another manufacturer who didn't release any model numbers but were showing off the technology was Samsung as well. So some interesting tech on their site, Steve, regarding SUHD. Now, they said it's up to you to define what the S means. Kind of dangerous.
Yeah, really asking for trouble, isn't it?
But again, higher dynamic range, wider color gamuts. This was this began to be the buzzword for this year's CES, and I'm sure you cottoned on pretty quickly, Mark, as well, with the press conferences, that this is going to be the year of either Dolby Vision or HDR. That seemed to be the buzzword.
They're kind of interrelated, aren't they? Judging by the interview with the guy from Dolby, sorry, I've forgotten his name. Yeah, it seems that they've been working with all the manufacturers, so I think whether they'll all carry the Dolby HDR, the Dolby Vision branding rather, they've definitely taken some of the technology from Dolby. So whether, I think Philips definitely will be Dolby Vision.
No, not definitely. They've been working with Dolby for some time now.
TCL will definitely Dolby
Vision.
Yeah,
what we'll see is some of the smaller, so TCL or Hisense, people like that will, I think, go with Dolby, because that's what they tend to do. If you look at their stands, what they're doing is they're cherry-picking technology. They're not developing anything themselves. They're not pumping billions into development yet. They're just cherry-picking the best stuff.
And it was funny that neither had OLEDs.
No, which was a bit of a concern, because they had plenty of them last year, so a bit of a worry. But they've got things like Roku TV, Dolby Vision, so they're bringing in tech from other people. They're using quantum dots, so I think that's a sensible approach, unless you want to invest a lot of money in something. But they're gearing up basically to deliver that. And Dolby Vision, talking to the guy as he explained how it works, you think, well, that's very sensible. The idea of having a set standard, and also the fact that you have the set standard, then the TV will tell, if it's a Dolby Vision TV, it will know what the TV is capable of and map the color and dynamic range performance to that specific television. That's great. What I can see are some manufacturers maybe don't want to necessarily get in bed just with Dolby, and that's the problem, because even Philips was saying, yes, we're working with Dolby, but we're also developing our own version.
Yeah.
And we might go the other way.
I'd
rather have one standard. Rather than have one standard, rather than mess around with different standards, because then everything gets confusing and you don't know what your TV is going to do.
Yeah, I think the main thing is licensing.
Well, that's the thing.
They've got to pay license fees and so on to Dolby to have Dolby Vision, and it may be that they're going to develop their own thing. I mean, I'm not sure where it stands patent-wise and that kind of thing, but if they're developing their own things alongside the Dolby Vision, then they're going to go for their own thing rather than pay for a license fee. But I think the buzzword is HDR, and certainly speaking to the likes of Danny Tak from TP Vision, who obviously that's the background name for Philips, and a couple of others like the guy from Dolby. I've got to say, this is my opinion, but it looks like they're trying to get at least another 2 or 3 years out of LED LCD technology.
Well, it seems to be Plan B for OLED, is something I commented on. It was I think a lot of them went down. Well, a few were certainly investigating OLED a few years ago, and they've not cracked the manufacturing, at least outside of LG. And it's kind of Plan B to quantum dot and HDR is a new thing that the UHD Alliance will be using to their advantage. So I think it's kind of Plan B while OLED.
The only caveat to that is, and rightly so, is that OLED can't quite reach the brightness levels that HDR will.
Not yet.
I'm sure they'll be able to get it up to 1,000.
I think they'll be able to crack it
at some point.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a conspiracy to extend the life of LED necessarily. I think that's one of the aspects of it.
I don't think anybody said it was a conspiracy. It's
no,
just
but not a conspiracy. But there's also, and I'm glad to see this, for once in their lives, the manufacturers have seen some sense, and they're all getting together under the UHD Alliance to actually get up to create a series of specifications and standards for UHD.
I think you just have to say, in that case, you just have to say DVD. And I think
exactly.
Everybody got together for that, and it was a big success.
The most successful launch ever of a technology, because for once in their lives they weren't all bloody arguing.
Yeah, exactly. And they try to go their own way with HD, DVD, and Blu-ray, and that just ended up being a farce. So, this UHD Alliance, it could be that it's going to work not only in the advantage of the manufacturers and the content producers, but also the general public. And like we were discussing with, I think it was with Danny Tak when we had our meeting with him. All we look for in terms of the AV Forums team here is that we're seeing things as the artist intended, and trying to get TVs and projectors and stuff set up correctly. And if HDR works and it's mapping to the content and so on, then it could more or less do away with professional calibration. I know both of you guys being calibrators don't really want to hear that, but if you're a member of the public or even an enthusiast, if the colour is going to be mapped properly by a display that's HDR, then the only thing that needs to be set up is the brightness and contrast for the room that it's being used in.
Yeah, but that's not easy, Phil. You need special equipment for that.
What, a test pattern and a pair of eyes?
That one.
But as a consumer, if it goes that way and the content is produced and mapped properly and the TV maps that properly in terms of colour gamut and contrast ratio, then the only thing you need to do is set it up for the room that it's in, and bingo, away you go. And that's kind of the Holy Grail. Holy Grail? Who's Holy Grail? That's kind of the Holy Grail that we have been pushing for a number of years.
Yeah, the HDR mapping kind of just replaces the gamma function, doesn't it? So it's mastered in a what they call a PQ space, which I think is perceptual quantification or something like that. So it just basically it replaces the gamma function, the HDR mapping, to take account of the panel brightness.
But there'll also be color mapping too. So once again, it'll map to the television.
It might not do it perfectly. You never know.
No, but what is good though, and this is something we were talking about years ago. Is that this is an opportunity to create a new set of standards that reflect the capabilities of the technology we have now. Because what's currently being used was obviously developed 20 odd years ago, and things have moved on considerably in the last 20 years. And now we can have a new set of standards, which it looks like, and obviously it hasn't been announced yet, so this is pure speculation, but it looks like it's going to be, the main standard will be higher dynamic range, DCI P3 color space,
10-bit
video, and so
and higher peak luminance.
That's good news, because that basically means that ultimately we're all going to benefit from a better picture.
Yeah,
not just a higher resolution, but a better picture all around.
And you guys were obviously there and saw it, but the impressions I got, even from the videos watching on a PC monitor, that some of the HDR stuff looked really, really good, just filmed off a video camera.
It did, but again, some of the displays were obviously being pushed to the max. The prototypes, and you could tell that they were trying to push every last ounce of detail out of the sets and every last bit of power, and obviously that was a concern as well, which I raised with Danny Tak. How hot are these TVs going to get? Because you're generating more light, you're generating more heat, even LCDs.
Dolby says no hotter. They don't go any hotter.
What they were saying
with their Dolby Vision.
What Danny said was that the LEDs have become more efficient, and therefore they can get them brighter without generating more heat. So that's their claim. We'll see. But you're right, Phil. I mean, you're right, they were being pushed to their limits, but I guess they were prototypes rather than finished samples. So
prototypes, they were being pushed to the last inch of their lives, basically. And you could tell that some of the material, there was one scene where Tom Cruise's hair, there was no detail. In the HDR version, whereas the conventional, there was loads of detail there. So obviously clipping going on within that, which you couldn't see on the conventional. And this leads us on to 1886, which is a standard for gamma, which has been around for about 2 years now, but a lot of conventional TVs at the minute just can't do it properly. And I've certainly not been a huge fan of the standard, haven't really seen the benefits of it. However, having now had a chance to see HDR in the flesh from a number of manufacturers, Steve, and seen content which was mastered for high dynamic range, and I'm thinking about that Exodus clip that we watched in the Samsung behind the closed door demo, that had been mastered. It was mapping properly to TV. It was using 1886, and it looked pretty phenomenal, to be honest, and had me changing my mind quite quickly in terms of...
That was the clip I was talking about, was the Exodus movie. It looked fantastic, even on the videos. Yeah,
it did. It looked absolutely astounding. And, 1886 starts to make sense, and... there was comments made that maybe we shouldn't be referring to gamma anymore. Like you say, Steve, gamma was a term, but probably older than 20 years.
Well, yeah,
back to CRT days. Obviously the 20 year ago that was Rec 709 was invented 20 years ago. But
it's easier than saying electro-optical transfer function, though.
Yes, it is a little bit. It is. It's a bit of a mouthful. We need to think of something else to call it. But technically, we shouldn't be calling it gamma anymore, because if these digital sets using HDR can map properly, and it looks like they can. I've got to say, for the first time in a number of years, I think this has been quite a technically driven CES, and one where the technology looks like it's going to be worthwhile and will come to market.
Yeah, I find it all quite exciting, all this stuff. I mean, we've heard about Dolby Vision for years, haven't you? But the technology's not been there to deliver it, and now it's getting there. So it's I find it's 4K was never. I didn't think it was ever going to be enough, just the resolution jump for most people. Well, on the average size display, they're not going to get it, but they'll see more colours, better contrast.
Yeah. Well, we said it a number of years ago when we first started talking about 4K. Let's get better color spaces. Let's get, use more bit rate. And it looks like finally, after a long time, that seems to be where things are going. And it's interesting in that respect, Steve, talking about digital displays and so on. And I know we shouldn't get too carried away with this, but we could start seeing basically content produced for the cinema in the home.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like last week Warner's announced that their first 3 titles that they've remastered in HDR, and I'm assuming that also includes a wider color gamut, which was Into the Storm and Edge of Tomorrow and the Lego Movie. So we're going to start seeing content. Well, I mean, ideally, what we're saying is they'll have one master, one which they'll use for cinema and also use for home theatre distribution.
So I think we need to
domestic distribution.
I think we need to explain that. So at the moment, you have DCI P3, which is used in the cinema, which basically says how strong the colours are and how many degradation. I can't even say my words now.
Gradations.
How many gradations is possible within that, so a higher bit rate and so on. So the more bits you got, the more you can play about with things and make slight hues of colour look better without getting striping and banding and all the rest of it. So, it's quite high spec for the cinema. At the moment, Blu-ray and DVD and TV is all in the Rec 709 colour space, which is far less than the DCI spec. So the DCI spec is a wider colour gamut, and when we say wider colour gamut, it just means it can display more. So Rec 709 is not bad. It's 8-bit, and 8-bit's been around a long time, but it's not bad. It looks really good, and get a decent Blu-ray, and it looks really nice. But it's not gonna be able to get to the levels of a cinema release, Steve, and that's because the displays are not capable of getting that wide. That's how it works at the minute. But if we go HDR with a new standard, with a wider colour gamut, whether that's using quantum dot or whatever technology it is to achieve the wider gamut, what they create for the cinema is what we will see at home. And I think that's been the holy grail for a long time. And I think anybody that's still thinking about Rec 2020, forget it. I don't think we're ever going to see content produced, certainly not in the next 10 years at that standard. It is a recommendation of a standard, but the cinema, professional cinema, professional capture, all the rest of it works at DCI P3. It's a wider colour gamut than 709. That's your upgrade in colour. That's where things are going to go. It means that we don't have to invest in new cameras. We don't have to invest in, processing films to a wider colour gamut and all the rest of it. It will follow Hollywood, and that's where Hollywood is at the minute.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense from the point of view of the studios too. It keeps the cost down. You just have the one master for the cinema, and then you take that master and you basically apply it to the domestic market. And okay, the resolution is not exactly the same between cinema 4K and home cinema 4K, but it's close enough. You can use the same color space using 10-bit video and D65, which is the same as the cinema, and then HDR. And I mean, the results for us are going to be that we're seeing at home an image that's very close to what you'd see at the cinema, which I guess for a home cinema enthusiast is the holy grail, isn't it? It is the dream.
Yeah,
we're going to almost
it might
get
be better
at
than
home.
The average cinema.
Well, yeah, and also once you take into account other factors, you could probably be looking at an image and a sound quality that's better than anything you're going to get at the cinema, which is awesome as far as I'm concerned. And as we said earlier in this podcast, the idea that the manufacturers and the studios and everyone's getting together to come up with this standard for both UHD delivered, be it online or via Blu-ray or whatever the delivery system is, but having a standard that delivers a performance that's better than what we currently got and similar to what we get at the movies is fantastic as far as I'm concerned.
One thing that Stuart raised, and obviously Stuart isn't doing what we do every week, every day of the week, guys, and that's looking at this stuff and trying to figure out where things are going. And one thing he said to me is, well, does this mean that OLED's not quite the holy grail display that we all thought it was? So what's your thoughts, Steve?
It could be. It can be. It certainly can hit DCI. Need to push a bit more brightness out of it, but I'm sure that they're capable of doing that. So it could be, because obviously the one advantage OLED's got over, a number of advantages, but the big one is the black levels, which are, if you've got absolute black and 1000 nits peak white, suddenly that's a really, really punchy dynamic image that's going to look amazing. Better than you'd see at a cinema for a kickoff, because you're never going to get that kind of dynamic range out of a projector. So that's great. But clearly, based upon what I've seen to date, yes, OLED looks amazing, but they're obviously buggers to make. And whilst LG have been banging on about OLED for 2.5 years now, Phil, since we went to its launch in May of 2012, the fact is it's now January 2015, and we've reviewed 3 OLED TVs, one of which isn't made anymore because that was the Samsung. So we've seen 2 LGs, and they're great, but they're not being made in the numbers, and constantly announcing models but never actually releasing them in the shop does not, to me, quantify as a real product, whatever LG might say. So until we start seeing significant numbers at realistic prices, it's not a viable technology. And that's what everyone else is basically saying. Yes, you can say, well, they would say that because they're not making the OLED panels. And Samsung, for example, are never going to buy them off of OLED, but off of LG. But if they're saying that we can deliver a really good performance from an existing technology at a much more realistic price, then from a point of view of the consumer, you've got to say, well, that sounds pretty good. And having seen a 77-inch Samsung LED LCD TV showing HDR material, which was the Exodus clip we were talking about earlier, Mark, having seen that myself, and standing in front of it, I thought that looked pretty impressive. The black levels were great. It was using local dimming very effectively. The backlight uniformity was very good, even though it was a very bright image. I thought it looked stunning. So, yes, you could say, well, they would say that, but if they can deliver the kind of performance that we've seen in some of the displays and demos in the last week to the consumer, realistically at a decent price, that does make sense.
When your bright elements are so bright, it makes the blacks look darker anyway, so it's kind of make up for it.
Yeah. Plus also, and this is an interesting point that people forget, you know what? No, most people, 99% of people do not watch, and that includes me and you, I suspect, Mark and Phil. We don't watch TV in a pitch black room. No one does. You watch TV in a room with some, and you should watch TV with a bit of bias lighting, and because it's more comfortable, it's easier, it makes more sense, you can see what you're doing, and you want a bit of bias lighting behind the TV, and so having these punchy dynamic images is going to really work well in the average living room. If you want to watch in pitch black conditions, go and buy a projector.
Yeah.
But if it's TV, you're not watching in a pitch black room, so absolute blacks aren't really that important anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's just nice to have, but at the end of the day.
Well, you made the point that it's good for the consumer. It's not only good for the consumer, but the reason why these companies are doing it, and we're talking about Panasonic, Sony, Philips, Samsung. The reason that they're still pushing old technology, LED, LCD technology, is the fact that it makes business sense for them. They need to be making money. Panasonic, since they got rid of plasma, their TV division is actually starting to go back towards the black again. Same for Sony. They've cut a lot of the models, a lot of the dross that they were doing, just concentrating on a core. They're starting to head back towards the black. So from a business point of view, it makes perfect sense that they keep developing while they wait to see where OLED is going to go. And obviously Panasonic have hinted at an OLED screen for this year, 2015. So, OLED's not dead. I think generally the buzzword and certainly the coverage would seem to suggest that LED's finally cracked it and is better than OLED. That's not what we're saying at all. I don't want that to come across as any kind of truth. It's not the truth. OLED is going to be the future. Just because it's a self-emitting technology, it will get up to the levels where it'll display HDR just as well, if not a lot better than the technology that we've seen. But the technology that we've seen is exciting stuff and is certainly pushing an old technology further. The black levels are better, and I think an important thing again to raise, Steve, from Panasonic, is that they're going to go with VA panels on everything this year, and the same with Philips over, I think it was the 6000 series upwards. Everything's going to be a VA panel. So finally, these manufacturers are starting to realise that certainly in the UK market, black levels contrast range is more important than a wide viewing angle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anyone who's seen a decent VA panel will know that they're capable of really good blacks. I mean, not OLED levels, but really good black levels. And when you apply that to a nice even backlight and good local dimming, you can get some really impressive performance out of it. For example, the X9005 Sony from last year, I thought had an absolutely awesome image for an LED LCD television. It's really good to see that Panasonic have listened to feedback, because they'll admit themselves that the AX902, it came to market too late, and an IPS panel killed it basically as an enthusiast product, and it was probably too expensive as well. But this year, they're going to use VA across their entire range for the UK. So that shows you that they're listening to our feedback. They're listening to what consumers and enthusiasts have been saying, and they've realised that was a mistake. And last year was going to be tough for them. It's a transitionary year after losing plasma. But I think if they're true to their word, they could come up with a really strong lineup of TVs this year. And as I say, if you apply VA technology well, it can look really good. Samsung have certainly shown that last year, and they marked with the TVs we reviewed. And based upon what I saw at the show, they're going to be doing it again this year. And I think people have to remember something here. This is a business, okay? You just can't sit and think, well, why aren't you doing OLED? Because they haven't got $1 billion to invest in it, and they have to put something out in the market this year. Because if you don't buy their TVs, they're going to stop making them, like Toshiba have done, like Sharp have done in Europe. So, people need to get realistic here and stop thinking as an enthusiast and start thinking as a businessman. At the end of the day, these are businesses. They have to make money or they don't make TVs at all. So which would you rather have? Something that's not quite what you want now or nothing at all? Because those are your two options. And people need to take a reality check sometimes. And some of the comments I've read have just been ludicrous.
I'll tell you what, from a selfish personal point of view, I'm looking forward to this year in reviewing televisions much more than I was last year.
and the reason for that, Mark, is
just because I'm now going to get a better standard of TV coming through the door.
Yeah. But it is encouraging that certainly the companies are listening, certainly to the UK market, which is saying, look, we want the black levels, we want the dynamic range, the contrast levels that IPS just isn't capable of. But it also makes business sense that lower down the range they will use IPS panels, because the people that buy those TVs are not as discerning as the enthusiasts and those that are going for all-out picture quality when it comes to TV. And we are missing plasma in the marketplace, and the big hope is OLED. So Panasonic, I think we've got to be careful here, because I think a lot of people, again, like you say, Steve, in the comment section, kind of jumped the gun a little bit with this will be ready for so and so and so and so. They haven't given any release date yet, but they have strongly hinted at an OLED TV, 65-inch OLED TV being made available this year. And when they're saying that, you can guarantee that that's going to be the end of the year, if not into 2016. But it's encouraging that they are looking at that, because that is a big investment to make. Like you've just been saying, these are businesses that have to make money. For them to even consider releasing something like that, it takes a lot of commitment financially as well as technology. Sorry?
No, it's an LG 65.
It'll be an LG 65, but everything behind that panel will be Panasonic technology. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with an OLED panel. What they can actually do with that, and that's going to be interesting, as is 4K Blu-ray, which again end of this year, probably into the beginning of next year. So next CES is going to be big for 4K Blu-ray. Let's hope that it's a bit more than just
as it's now known, UHD Blu-ray.
Well, I was just going to come on to that.
I noticed that you didn't announce one of those players.
No, I asked them about that when I was at their stand, and they said, actually what they said to me was the specs and standards were agreed last week. This was last week, so the week before. So apparently they've agreed the specs and standards. Haven't been announced yet, but they've agreed them. And they were waiting on that before actually sort of announcing anything in terms of players. But I'm sure we will see. We'll see a lot more announcements going forward this year in terms of UHD Blu-ray.
My only concern with that is it's going to be a niche, and is it going to be too small a niche for a lot of the film companies to start releasing stuff?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a niche. I mean, Blu-ray's a niche, so this is going to be a niche of a niche.
Yeah, but this is going to be a really niche product to start with.
It will be, but from the point of view of, I mean, if you look at the specifications that, haven't been finalised yet, but certainly have been put around by Panasonic with their prototype, 100 megabytes a second, and all the other things like DCI and HDR and also mentioning higher frame rates, which I could probably do without, but fair enough. When you look at all that, to deliver that in the best possible way, you really are going to need a disk-based system. I mean, for me, example, there's no way in hell I'm going to get any of that down a broadband connection for another 5 years. So again,
you make up a small.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think actually I make up a broad spectrum of the market, particularly in the States. Where they haven't got that kind of broadband coverage in the middle bits away from the big cities. And large parts of the UK also don't get coverage like that.
So that's one argument, but the other argument is that do the public really want all this extra technology, and do they actually want that level of performance, or they're quite happy to stream Netflix and buy DVDs still?
Most people are
happy to stream Netflix, I reckon.
I guess if they can make money doing it, they'll do it, and if they can't make money doing it, they won't. That's the simple answer, isn't it?
I think it's going to be very much a laser disc of the what decade are we into now?
the tweens.
The tweens, yeah. It's very much going to be the laser disc of now, I think. I mean, it's encouraging. I'm looking forward to seeing it. I'm looking forward to seeing how well it is adopted. But it's got a bigger fight in its hands than DVD and Blu-ray have had in the past at launch. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. Other thing that was announced, UHD Alliance. Tell us all about it, Steve.
Well, the UHD Alliance, as the name suggests, is an alliance of companies designed to both promote and agree standards and specifications for Ultra HD going forward, which is good news all round. And it's a very broad membership. So you've got post-production, so people like Dolby and Technicolor. You've got all the manufacturers, at least all the major ones I could see were involved. Studios, all the major studios are involved. And also the distributors, so people like Netflix and Amazon are involved as well. So that's brilliant, because that's from beginning to end, total coverage. All the key players are there. And as we were saying earlier, if they can sit down and all agree something together, that's better for them and ultimately much better for us. You don't want competing formats and systems. You just want one good system that works. And that's what they're doing. So that's good news. And I think, obviously we'll wait to hear them actually announce it, but we can guess, as we've already mentioned in this podcast, roughly what we're going to get from them, I think. And I think in the long run, that's good news all around.
Yeah, it's always good to see them all getting together, and hopefully that's going to move things forward. Now, where there is a potential, I'm reluctant to say the words format war these days because I think it gets overused, but there are three competing technologies when it comes to audio for home cinema, Steve. Two of them we've reported on in quite some detail. Auro 3D, we did a video with Wilfried back, was it back in March of last year? We'll put the link to the video in the podcast notes. And we've also done quite a bit on Dolby Atmos, and we did quite a bit at the show as well about those two technologies, but also the new technology from DTS called DTS-X, and they couldn't tell us anything other than it's coming in March, and that was about it, apart from a demo. In terms of a demo, well, it was a demonstration of the sound format, not in a configuration that we would say was a home theatre configuration. It was a round room that we were in with a 360-degree projector layout. The speakers at the horizontal plane were hidden, so we're not sure if there was height speakers used or not, along with the horizontal plane, but there was definitely Voice of God speakers or height ceiling speakers, Steve, because there was about 6 or 7 of them, and they were all placed in a circle to go with the rest of the circular room. It was impressive, it was immersive, but that's about as much as we can say. Yeah,
I mean, that was clearly meant to be sort of a demo of potential technology, but it was a very artificial. It certainly wouldn't be. I don't think it's meant to be a representation of how it would be applied in the home, in someone's lounge or home cinema. And as you said, Phil, we'll get the full details in March. So really, as far as DTS-X is concerned, don't know who's supporting it in terms of. I can give you a clue possibly, because there was a clip from Divergent showing, and I think they had on the demo disc they've got a clip from Rio 2. So maybe Fox, maybe Lionsgate might be supporting them, but at the moment we don't really know who's supporting them in terms of the studios, how it'll be delivered in terms of manufacturers. Presumably it'll be over Blu-ray and over HDMI as the other two are. Otherwise they'll be really making a rod for their backs. But in terms of manufacturers, we don't know yet. We'll find all this out, I'm assuming, in March when it's announced. We also don't know exactly what kind of configuration they're using in terms of speakers. Assuming it's again object-based, but exact configuration, don't know yet. So it's all just conjecture and guesswork at the moment. We just don't know, but we'll find out. But what we do know at the moment is we've got 2 already on the marketplace, Atmos and Auro, and we've got a third one coming, and that is going to get pretty confusing for the. Well, I mean,
DTS had to do it.
Yeah,
they had no choice. They had to do it. The other two are doing it. If they didn't want to be left behind, they had to do it. The interesting thing is, and it's been like this since basically Blu-ray became a popular format, and that is that around about 80-85% of all discs have a DTS Master Audio soundtrack. The rest have Dolby True HD.
Yeah, that's true. And that gives them you'd think give DTS a slight more than a slight advantage in terms of delivering it over
if that
Blu-ray.
is the case, if it can be delivered within that bit stream, it gives them a huge advantage.
Except
over
for one
two.
thing, which is that currently Auro and particularly Atmos, these are used worldwide in cinemas. So they're taking the Atmos soundtrack that's been created for the cinema, and they're basically creating a home cinema version of that, or a domestic version of that for delivery over HDMI and Blu-ray through the Dolby True HD soundtrack. Fine, that's relatively straightforward and inexpensive for the studio to do. If they have to take, there is no DTS cinema track, so they're going to have to create a DTS X track for every disc they release separately, which might be costly. So maybe there's not so much incentive to do that anymore. I don't know. I mean, that's the argument certainly that Dolby and Auro was making, which again you would say, well, they would say that, but it is a valid point. If there's no existing soundtrack to start from, it's not just different with 5.1 and 7.1. You're just taking that and delivering it through DTS or Dolby True HD, which is essentially just somewhere delivering it in a lossless or mostly lossless format. If you're going to do a completely new mix, that's going to cost money. And I think the way we're going is the studios want to avoid any unnecessary expense. They want to just take what they've already got in the cinema and bung it out in the home. So maybe that isn't going to work for DTS as well. Don't know. That's just an opinion of mine. But let's see. Well, first of all, let's find out what they've actually got up their sleeves, and then hear it,
yeah.
And then we'll find out. But certainly you got to hear Atmos for the first time. So what did you think of that?
Yeah, very impressive. As is Auro. It's an impressive way of doing things. It's certainly immersive, and when it's done right. I mean, the only thing with Dolby, and this is, I think I've made this point in a previous podcast when we were listening to the demo disc. A lot of the Dolby material is just the Dolby Atmos trailers, which have been specially mixed and are pretty over the top when it comes to object-based stuff, Steve, like effects and all the rest of it. And it even sounds good in 5.1, those trailers, without adding in the extra speakers. So the only film clip that we had was Star Trek Into Darkness, and for me, I thought the mix was a little bit hot. And when I say that, I mean it was a little bit too obvious that they were playing with effect and sticking objects in certain areas of the sound field. So it felt too obvious, if you know what I mean. But yeah, it just as good as Auro 3D was, and we had another demo of Auro 3D and another demo of their up mixer with that the mono track of Heard It Through Grapevine. We had that demo again and again. Really impressive stuff. So both the formats, both ways of doing things work really well and are immersive. The only thing I will say is that what we listen to in Atmos possibly draw you out of the movie if it's mixed as much as that or as hot as that. I mean, the whole point of a soundtrack is that you don't notice it. It is enveloping, it is immersive, but it doesn't take you out of what it is that you're watching on screen. Yeah. I felt Atmos was maybe a little bit over the top, but then again, it was a demo to demonstrate over the top effects. So.
But you also got a chance to hear the upward firing speakers.
Yeah, and I knew you were going to bring this up. Yeah, I will eat a little bit of humble pie. If they work as well as the ones in the demo there, and people have got a flat ceiling to reflect off, then it does work, and it works particularly well. I was impressed with that. I have to say, I didn't think it would be able to trick the brain more with the time delay, to be honest with you. Than anything else. So the little bit of processing that goes on there to create the sound feel, it works. And certainly that demo, it did work really well.
I think in the end of the day, it's obviously going to come down to content. Whoever gets the most content in the marketplace is going to have the advantage. So as we stand at the moment, I think there are about 4 or 5 Atmos discs available.
I think the big problem is here, Steve, and it's not going to be a problem in terms of buying the kit, because I think the vast majority of manufacturers, and I think we're safe saying this, even though we haven't had any confirmation whatsoever from any of the manufacturers, is that your brands like Denon, Marantz, Onkyo, all those types, give it another year, all of the mainstream AVR brands will have Dolby, Auro, and DTS:X.
Yeah,
they'll have all 3 formats. What the consumer at the end of the day is going to have to worry about is speaker configuration. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing that has been suggested to us, and was certainly suggested to us at CES, is that certain standards have been changing over the past 12 months in terms of where they're placing the speakers, and it's starting to get to the stage where obviously we don't know about DTS, but where Oro and Dolby, the speakers are starting to get very close to where they are in each configuration.
Yeah. And I think that when you talk about, you don't want to say format war, but that is the problem at the moment. It's not like with DTS and Dolby True HD and DTS Master Audio, where they had exactly the same speaker configuration, so you could just go from one to the other without any problems. As it currently stands, Atmos has 5 or 7 speakers at ear level plus subwoofers, and 2 or 4 speakers overhead. I mean, you could do more than that with some of the processors, but your basic configuration with a receiver is that. With Oro, you have a basic configuration, which would be 5.1 at ear level, and then 4 height speakers, front left and right, and rear left and right, or rather side left and right, sorry. Then you could also, if you wanted to, add two rear speakers as a 7.1, and also have a height above the center channel, and then and ultimately a voice of God speaker, so 1 overhead speaker. Now, those, as it stands, are not compatible. What was being suggested is that the overhead speakers are sort of moving towards the size of Atmos more than they were originally spec'd, which puts them closer to where the height speakers would have been in Oro, and so the two become more compatible for someone who wants to have one. Because what you don't want to have to do, and I haven't done this myself, even though I have both Atmos and Oro at home, is I don't want to have 7.1 speakers at ear level and then 4 overhead.
Yeah.
5 height and a voice of God. I mean, it's just getting ridiculous. And what I've got at the moment, where my overhead Atmos speakers are, is close enough that I can use them also for Oro height, and that's my solution. And I think if that's the way they go, that would make a lot of sense. And as you said, we don't know where DTS are going to put their speakers yet.
Well, you see, if I was DTS, I'd be clever here, and I would do a mixture of both.
Yeah.
And I would possibly be clever enough to try and have my system where the other two could be decoded on my system, if I was clever.
And I think there might be something along those lines happening anyway. Certainly, DTS and Oro have been working together, although there's been some comments made recently that maybe have annoyed them, but maybe that is the plan. If you think about it, you could. I mean, DTS did DTS Neo X in the past, and that was height at the front and also width speakers. Now, Atmos has width options. Obviously, Oro has height options, and then both have overhead options. So if I had to hazard a guess here, I would suggest that DTS X is going to have normal 5 or 7.1, height options and overhead options, and width options. It probably will encompass all of the existing formats. It's also some super Uber format.
Yeah. And we have to point out at this moment in time that myself and Steve, this is pure speculation.
Yeah. We don't
know anything. We haven't been told anything behind closed doors or anything like that. We're not hinting at anything. It's just speculation. Right, so I think, certainly looking at my list of things that I wanted to talk about, and certainly what you've got in the running order here, Steve, we have covered everything that we've seen. Don't forget, we've got all our videos up there. There's 25 videos from the show floor with hands-on interviews, all that kind of thing. Go and watch them. Also, Mark did quite a few articles, so if you want to know what HDR is that we've been talking about in the podcast, there is an article there. If you want to know what quantum dots are, and you don't need Ziggy, then you go and read the article there. And what we'll do, publish date of Wednesday. So when this podcast goes up, if you're listening on Wednesday and Thursday, then these articles will be in the second layer of the homepage. So if you go and have a look, you'll be able to find them easy enough. So to finalise this week's podcast before we get back to the normal weekly podcast next Wednesday, what did you watch on the plane, Steve?
Well, on the way out, I watched Hercules with The Rock, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I'm not saying it's a great film, but it was fun. I watched, let me see, The Rewrite with Hugh Grant. Nice to see Hugh Grant in a romantic comedy again. I think it's the first film he's done since Cloud Atlas, so that was okay. Mildly amusing and fun. On the way back, I watched Maps of the Stars, which is the David Cronenberg film. Oh, that was a weird movie. I had no idea what that was about. It was very disturbing and strange. I also watched Life of Crime, which is based on the Elmore Leonard novel, The Switch, and is actually kind of like a prequel to Jackie Brown. It's got two of the characters from Jackie Brown. The character that Samuel L. Jackson and Robert De Niro played. They're younger versions of them in that, which was okay. It was quite good fun.
Cool.
And I watched Let's Be Cops, which was really puerile, silly, but also mildly entertaining in places. If you like the actors involved, you probably quite enjoy that. And did I watch anything else? I think that's about it.
Well, going out, I watched A Million Ways to Die in the West. Some really funny bits in it, but for the majority, quite poor, to be honest. And I watched a couple of other bits and pieces on the way out. The one that I really enjoyed, Steve, it's one which the review will go up next Monday from Simon, is What We Did on Our Holidays.
Oh yeah, that's the one I watched. Yeah.
Which is a little British film with David Tennant in it and Billy Connolly, and I didn't hold up much hope for it, but actually, I laughed all the way through. It was really, really funny, really quite a sweet little movie actually. So if you get the chance to watch that. And on the way back, I slept. So I didn't watch nearly as many movies as you did, which is usually the case anyway.
Yeah, I mean. It wasn't quite as bad as last. I think last year when we flew out to Vegas and back, I'd seen every single film that was on that was being shown. At least this year I had a few to choose from, and there was some good stuff in there. But it's not the best place to watch a film, obviously, on a plane. But it's a good way of catching up with things you missed the first time round. Or
I did notice the blanket over your lap while you were watching The
Rock. It was nice and comfy and warm.
No disgrace in a blanket.
Right, okay, so that wraps up everything for this week. It is a little bit short and sweet, but we wanted to go through everything that we saw at CES, and hopefully you picked up a few bits and pieces there. Hopefully you're as excited and interested in this year's TV products as we are. It certainly looks like it's going to be an interesting year after last year, which was a bit of a strange year, guys, with the death of plasma and all the rest of it. A bit of a transitional year, I think it was your terminology, Steve. So interesting to see where things are going. Obviously we've got Dolby Vision, HDR, UHD Alliance, UHD Blu-ray and immersive audio. I've got to say, I can't remember a time where we had so many things going on in the home cinema world. As we do
once you add in laser projection as well, it could be an exciting year for the home cinema enthusiast. Definitely.
Yeah, totally, and hopefully more native 4K projectors as well for fans of the
by
big screen.
somebody other than Sony.
Because obviously CES, it's not really a projector show. Projectors are normally summer to September launches, mainly CEDIA. Shows mainly when they get launched. So if people are worried that there was no projectors announced, don't worry, it's not that time of the year. It's usually later in the year for projectors. So that wraps up the podcast. My thanks to Steve Withers.
Thank you, Phil.
And Mark Hodgkinson.
Cheerio.
We really should have done film quotes from The Hangover, but we didn't think about that at the start, so we're a bit late in doing it now.
Kind of sums it up, really, doesn't it?
How I'm feeling at the minute, I'm about to go back to my bed. Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, bookmark avforums.com for latest reviews, news and video, and please leave us a rating on iTunes. I'm Phil Hinton, thanks for listening, and the Abnormal service will be resumed next week.